All right, everyone, you probably know I'm not a fan of the UN. I don't think anyone who's sane is at this point because for years and years, this monolithic entity exists and it does nothing. It's like they're like, oh, maybe we need to do something about Darfur. This was, from when I was like in high school. That was the big humanitarian crisis over there in Sudan with the Janjaweed rebels. My school and every other school raised money to try to save Darfur. What ended up saving Darfur was the splitting of the nation of Sudan into two pieces, one of which is run by Islamic extremists and the other one of which has a bunch of oil and is run by a marginally westernized regime and is, at least somewhat stable at this point. They managed to hammer out trade deals, by the way, which was good. So, it's sort of like good fences build good neighbors, I suppose, at that point. But the UN, inept and stupid and ineffectual as it is finally calling Venezuela what it is, which is a massive humanitarian crisis. Yeah, it wasn't a crisis 2 years ago when people started breaking into the local zoo to eat the animals there. It wasn't a crisis when they ran out of asthma medication last year. It wasn't a crisis when infant mortality tripled or quadrupled or some insane shit. It wasn't a crisis when they started re-importing their own money at expense just to have something to circulate. And it wasn't a humanitarian crisis when 1 million people fled to Colombia. But now it's a humanitarian crisis, and I'm going to tell you, Venezuela's crisis is going to get a shit ton worse because OPEC just decided to free up some extra production. With oil prices higher, U.S. firms are now doing what they were doing like 3 years ago before OPEC sort of shut off some of its valves. Opened the valves up to collapse the prices. It got to the point. U.S. firms were starting to drill it out of the ground. We're using hydraulic fracking. We're getting more energy production. We've become the largest energy producer in the world at this point. And there's plenty more that's basically sitting there because for a while it wasn't cost effective to do more drilling. There was no reason because production was already high. Then OPEC decided to pull back, and now they've sort of taken a half step forward. U.S. firms, though, they're still drill, baby, drill right now. Venezuela's not making as much oil. Their oil production has fallen off a cliff because they can't even operate the rigs. They don't have the supplies. They don't even have enough electricity to operate the sort of tools that they need to keep their rigs going. The plan fell through. They were going to build a refinery and start refining their own gas because they can't even afford it. But the other day, OPEC decided to free up some more production to stop throttling it quite so much. It's going to collapse the price of oil. And it was already fairly low. I think, 70 a barrel or something? And that's, like $20 higher than the low or some insane number. Now it'll probably go down $5-10 a barrel. And it's going to stay that way for some years to come. This, by the way, the gas prices should be falling around your neck of the woods. The other day, I think, on one side of the road was like, I can't remember the cost, like $2.70 something. And on the other side, it was the same. And then as I was driving by, the cost ticked down by like 5 cents. In a single go. It's fairly significant. That's a lot of relief for the U.S. economy, by the way. Gas prices will be falling. So now Venezuela will be making even less money. Europe just had to grant them $45 billion just to keep them afloat. It's not going to work. Maduro's going to be on his way out. Eventually someone's going to take a pot shot at him. It'll probably be one of his own troops. Then to say fucking enough is enough. Apparently, even the military, which for a while was basically you joined the military if you wanted to have at least 2 meals a day. You wanted to have food in your belly and reasonable access to medication, and you could probably have enough money at the end of the month so your family wouldn't at least starve to death. They could have the extra bowl of rice a week or something. That's no longer happening. People are suffering malnutrition now in their military. When the military, you have a military-first Juche-style policy. The North Korean military eats better than the Venezuelans at this point. Despite the fact that they have the world's largest proven oil reserves, they are sitting on a giant subterranean lake of oil, which is really, really easy to pump out, and they don't even have a functioning economy. How much longer? Well, we need to give an over and under. I'll give it at 12 months as far as how long Maduro stays alive. I think I'll take the over, but not by that much. It's a pretty good guess, probably. The UN. In order for the UN to condemn a situation, it has to be really bad. Because what's the natural inclination of a diplomatic body that is comprised of people from all nations in the world? To do nothing. Because they'll never be able to unanimously agree on everything. For a lot of decisions at the UN, you need overwhelming support for things. A single major member state can just veto literally anything. So you've got Venezuela, like, necessarily China or Russia, sort of in that pole of the world. They're going to tend not to want to condemn Maduro. They just want to suck his oil off. They want to take his oil away. They're the ones that are actually, you know, abusing his regime. He keeps blaming the United States. We're not the ones doing it, dude. Venezuelan people aren't being fucked by the United States. I remember years ago, I think it was back when Chavez was still alive and running the country. Didn't they have an oil deal with New York when the oil prices were sky high back then? Like when they, I think it was in the wake of Iraq or something, like when the oil prices doubled or some crazy shit. And then Venezuela's like, oh, we'll give oil discounted to New York because basically it's run by socialists. So we'll power New York City with millions of barrels of Venezuelan crude. And it was all very funny at the time. It was like, I think it was around the time that Vermont got a license from the U.S. government to sell some dairy cattle to Castro, to the Cubans, and that was very funny too. And it's like, nobody cared. This shouldn't even be an embargo. By the way, I think you can now get Cuban cigars and rum. For some reason, I'm not seeing a lot of hype about that, despite the fact that they're both supposedly amazing. It's like, I don't use tobacco anymore, but I might try the rum. But the UN, think about it. They're the most slow, inept group ever. Like, they show up and the peacekeepers show up somewhere. That's when you know there will be no peace. It makes the situation worse, and then they can't even, like, defend themselves. Like, have you ever seen, what was it? Was that movie Hotel Rwanda or something about the genocide there? And, like, it depicts the UN troops. And they're there, they're armed, but they can't even, like, defend themselves against mobs that are coming to try to kill the people they're attempting to protect. They can't do anything. They can't even, they're not authorized to use force unless they're already being shot at, I guess. You know, someone hacking your leg off with a machete wasn't quite enough for them. You have these cases. It was like in the Sudan. Basically, the UN shows up, forms a perimeter, staffs it in hopes that nobody attacks them because they won't want to tangle with, you know, an international military response. Ultimately, can't do anything. The Janjaweed rebels were raiding their camps all the time, and the UN did basically butt-fuck nothing. The genocide lasted for years and led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. And there was almost no action by the UN taken. I've still got the Save Darfur t-shirt that I've got from high school. It's really funny. So no, the UN finally condemns Venezuela and Maduro for this and says it's a massive humanitarian crisis. The time to declare it a humanitarian crisis and tell the rest of Latin America to get involved was several years ago. You should have gotten involved when there was a coup in the first place with Chavez. Nobody had the balls to do so, and then he started giving people oil-discounted toaster ovens, so nobody in the international community dared to step in, because he was a kinder, gentler version of a socialist fucking dictator freak. So nobody wanted to do anything, and they still don't. They don't want to get involved. That's about all. Peace out.